Hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to share with you what happens when we start getting scared or fearful of anxiety itself. It is really important that we do not get scared of anxiety. But you might ask a question that what happens when we get severe forms of anxiety, especially like a panic attack? Yes, anxiety has the potential to instill that fear with us, or deepen that fear within us when we go through certain traumatic situations. Like, let me give you an example. Someone I know had a panic attack right in the middle of a freeway. And can you imagine the feelings that went through and the kind of emotions that almost put her in a fight, flight, and freeze mode? Yes, when we go through very severe anxiety, it can be very, very scary. But it can be also very detrimental to us, because when we start moving from just having anxiety to start having fear of anxiety itself, that can lead to a lot of unwanted consequences. And today I'm going to share with you what kind of consequences that might happen when we start fearing anxiety. Earlier, I have talked to you about how anxiety and every emotion brings with it its own message. And anxiety is like an alarm clock, and it's waking us up to the threats that we might be experiencing. It can be physical threats, it can be emotional threats. For example, I might be feeling anxiety, and that might indicate a threat of being burgled. And so the action that I might be taking is to install a good lock system in my front door, or a good alarm system with a good alarm company. Now, another anxiety could be, that might be signaling a threat of falling sick. Again, I start watching my diet, my exercise, my lifestyle, my nutrition. And that is the corrective action that it might be leading to. So when we start observing the messages in anxiety, we are able to move from a place of just feeling anxious to taking corrective action about it and then overcoming our anxiety. So anxiety is really nothing to be feared, as once we start receiving those messages and acting upon them. Now, when we start fearing anxiety itself, that can lead to a lot of unwanted consequences. And what kind of consequences would that happen? Now, the first thing that happens when we start fearing anxiety is anxiety becomes a habit. Now, a habit is something that is repeated again and again and again. And that's what happens with anxiety. First, we get anxious about something, about A, and then we get anxious about B, and then we get anxious about C. And then slowly we find, as we are getting more and more and more anxious, it becomes a habit. It becomes a habitual pattern. And we start getting anxious about so many other things. Now, I'll give you an example. Say, Maxi had a seizure attack when he was flying right in the middle of the aircraft. Now, as a consequence, what happened? He developed a fear of flying. And this fear of flying took over his life. He started worrying about even entering a flight. He started worrying that he might get a seizure again when he flies. And this worry extended to a worry of becoming sick. Now, it was not restricted to getting a seizure, but it's added on to worrying about getting the COVID, or worrying about falling down and having a fracture, or worrying about getting fever. And so you see, the anxiety expanded from one thing to the other. And when he started worrying and he was getting anxious all the time, he was living in a fight, flight, freeze mode. When you live in a chronic fight, flight, freeze mode, it really intensifies the anxiety and it can become a chronic anxiety, like an anxiety disorder. So the more we become anxious about different things, the more we become anxious about anxiety itself. And anxiety gets repeated so often that it becomes a habit. It becomes a part of our personality. So initially we might start out with saying, I feel anxious. But as it becomes a habitual pattern, we start saying, I am anxious. And then we start saying, I am an anxious person. This is my personality. So do you see how it is moved from just feeling a feeling or emotion to becoming a habitual pattern? So that is the first consequence, unwanted consequence of getting fearful about anxiety. Now, the second consequence of that is we start becoming anxious about imagined threats. Anxiety is a signal that gives an indication about threats that we are facing. But the more and more anxious we get, we start becoming anxious about imagined threats, not something that is real, but that we are imagining. Now, let me give you again another example. And I'm using all fictitious names and examples just for us to elaborate and understand the concept. Neetu had faced a traumatic situation when her 4-year-old son fractured his hand while he was at school. And she became so paranoid about it. She became so upset about it that trauma increased her anxiety about everything that is connected to her children. She became anxious that they would hurt themselves. She became anxious when they, had a slight allergy. She would get anxious if they were in a low mood. She became so anxious about her children that she wouldn't let them go out of sight. And she wouldn't even feel comfortable when they go to school. Now, that is the kind of extrapolation that happens when you get anxious. You start getting anxious about not just real threats, but about imagined threats. And 90% of the situation that we are imagining to be a threat actually never happens. And that's the downside of getting so anxious that we are getting more and more anxious, not just about that particular situation or that particular incident, but we are getting anxious about anxiety itself. Now, that unmanaged anxiety can always result in a roller coaster reaction that affects us. It affects our behaviors, it affects our family, it affects our family harmony adversely. And when we examine closely, a lot of situations that we are anxious about never really happens. Now let's look at the third consequence, the third unwanted consequence of feeling anxious so much that we are anxious about anxiety itself. Our body feels the impact. Our body starts feeling the impact of our anxiety. Now, everybody, you all probably know about your body-mind connection, right? So when you have an exam tomorrow, you might start getting a headache today. And that's the connection between how strongly our mind affects our body and how strongly our body affects our mind. Now, anxiety itself can have negative impacts in the body. And these impacts can be both short-term as well as long-term. Now let's look at some short-term impact that anxiety brings. We might feel an increased heart palpitations. Maybe we have sweaty palms. Maybe our blood pressure goes up a little. Maybe we have breathing issues. Maybe we have stomach upsets. Maybe we have acid reflexes. Maybe we have pain in the body, muscle aches, fatigue, etc. So these are all the short-term impact. And when anxiety continues for a longer period of time, we start feeling long-term impacts in our body. And these long-term impacts are more detrimental. and can really bring forth a host of sicknesses that we really don't want. Now, what kind of long-term impact happens? We might have increased heart problems, which might result in heart disease. We might have chronic high blood pressure issues. We might have respiratory issues and asthma or autoimmune disorders, and all of those various diseases that is linked to low immunity. Again, we might have gastrointestinal issues related to frequent stomach upsets. We might have irritable bowel syndrome. And all of these are all not something that I'm just saying. These are all there. If you look up and Google and check, these are all common issues that is a consequence of chronic anxiety. Again, long-term anxiety results in concentration and focus issues and long-term memory problems. Pains in the body, stomach pain, back pain, head, shoulder pain, neck pain, all of those crop up as we have chronic anxiety, and it continues for a long period of time. And it might even result in major health issues like arthritis and rheumatism. Constant anxiety and stress can take a really heavy toll in the body. I just want to make sure that when you're listening to all this, you might feel an anxiety coming up just by listening. So I just want you to take a couple of deep breaths, calm down, and tell yourself this is awareness building exercise. I'm just learning. I'm just expanding my knowledge about the possible consequences of long-term anxiety, because that knowledge can equip me with the strength, with the energy to be conscious and adopt a lot of measures to reduce my anxiety and release it. Now, one more consequence of having anxiety and feeling anxious about anxiety itself is anxiety slowly starts getting more and more intense. I always tell my clients, when they come to me, say, just measure your anxiety and say on a scale of 0 to 10, what is your level of anxiety? 0 being no anxiety and 10 being the maximum anxiety that you've ever faced. And we might find that when we are getting habituated to anxiety, our intensity of anxiety starts shifting from initially it was just 1, 2, or 3, and then it moves to a 5, 6, 7, 8, and sometimes it goes to a 9 or a 10. So habitual and frequent anxiety can really get intense in different situations. It can start with mild anxiety, move to moderate anxiety, and then even go to a severe anxiety and panic attack. Well, let's look at this a little bit more closely. Mild anxiety is very common, and almost everyone experiences it. I have experienced it many, many times. And this happens as a very normal day-to-day occurrence in life. This is what we experience when we are going to take tests. I know I experienced a lot of mild and even moderate anxiety before my driving tests. So we might experience this when our child is going for its school the first day, or we might experience anxiety before making an important presentation. But this is a very common anxiety that we feel. And we might even feel some physical symptoms like sweaty palms. But generally, our mind is alert. And this anxiety helps us identify the threat and also helps us respond better to the situation. So being aware of mild anxiety when it happens will help you deal with that situation much more effectively, much more easily. With self-awareness and anxiety awareness, we can easily overcome anxiety at this stage. So this was about mild anxiety. Let's go on to moderate anxiety, when it goes into a little bit more middle spectrum, say an anxiety from, say, 4 to 6. And moderate anxiety happens in stressful situations and is a little bit more intense than the mild one. You can have a more increased heartbeat, more palpitations. You might have more breathlessness. You might have some bodily reactions like an acid reflux. You might even have a slight headache. You might feel nausea. You may feel a sense of, oh my God, what am I going to do? Now, once the stress reduces after that period of anxiety, you start feeling better, and then you're able to bounce back into normal living. That's what moderate anxiety is. Now, if you're experiencing moderate anxiety, it is time, and I always advise, this is the time to look for support. And you can look for support within the family, within your friends. Talk about your anxiety a little, improve your anxiety awareness, start researching for simple solutions, start researching for active solutions, start taking actual action. And in some cases, when you are having moderate anxiety itself, it's better to seek some kind of professional help. Now, let's go into severe anxiety. Now, in severe anxiety situations, we get affected far more deeply. You might have a lot of symptoms, physical symptoms. You might have a lot of emotional reactions. You might have lots of thoughts going on within. And it might even bundle into a panic attack. Now, this anxiety phase may also last for a much longer time. Maybe the panic attack itself is shorter, but the severity of the anxiety might last for a much longer time. And slowly, it might even become a habitual pattern if it's not addressed. At this stage, you definitely need help and support from a professional. When we go through panic attacks, especially panic attack is like the higher level. When we go through a panic attack or a panic attack level of anxiety, life can get completely disrupted. We may not be able to function well. We may not be able to take any kind of action. We might avoid a lot of situations. We might not be able to meet a lot of people. We might not be able to, take actions or decisions. Or we may take decisions that may negatively impact our course in life. In fact, your ability to think rationally is clouded when you're going through such severe anxiety and panic attack. Your perceptions may be clouded or even distorted. At this stage, you definitely need to take professional help and support. And not only that, you may need to work continuously with the professional for a sustained period of time. Now, all of this, what I'm sharing, is just awareness building. Once you're aware, you will be able to identify where you are and what kind of help you need. My intention is definitely not to scare you. I don't want you to become scared about anxiety just listening to this. But what I want you to do is to take ownership and just take an objective view and say, am I fitting into any of these brackets? And if so, what kind of action do I need to take? Now, anxiety is only an alarm system. And just like every alarm, you need to listen to it. You need to act on it. You definitely do not need to fear it. So take a deep breath and tell yourself that this is an awareness building exercise. Anxiety is itself not to be feared. It is only a messenger signaling a need for corrective action. Fearing your anxiety is like getting upset with your alarm clock because it is waking you up in the morning. Rather, you be grateful for it, isn't it? That your alarm is ringing and it's awakening you to a new day, new work, and new possibilities. So do not fear the messenger. Accept the message and take action. I hope you found this useful. And always remember to take a nice deep breath and relax. Have a wonderful day.